They told you sex was sinful, shameful, or meaningless. But what if it's sacred? What if everything you've been taught about sexuality was designed to keep you from discovering one of the most powerful gateways to spiritual truth? From the moment you were old enough to ask questions, the answers you received were coated in guilt, fear, or mockery. You were programmed to believe that sex was either something to be avoided or something to be consumed, but never something to be revered. And somewhere deep inside, you felt the contradiction. You sensed that something was missing, not just in the act itself, but in how the world spoke about it. Because sex is not separate from spirit. It is energy, it is memory, it is alchemy. And when approached consciously, it holds the power to unlock dimensions of yourself that no religion, no textbook, and no screen could ever reveal. This is where the real story begins. From the moment you became aware of your body, they were already there, shaping your perception of what that body meant. Before you understood energy, before you knew about desire, connection, or spirit, you were handed a script written not to empower, but to suppress. In schools, at home, through religion, media, and silent glances from adults who had long since been programmed themselves, you were told what sex was supposed to be: dirty, dangerous, sinful, or, on the other end of the spectrum, casual, meaningless, purely physical, a source of guilt or a game, but never a doorway, never sacred. As a child, you were curious, innocent, and energetically open, but that openness made you vulnerable not just to influence, but to manipulation. You were taught to dissociate the physical from the spiritual, to split the body from the soul, to compartmentalize love from lust, and pleasure from purity. In many cultures, these messages were passed down, not with malice, but with fear. Fear inherited from generations of suppression and shame. Parents didn't always realize what they were reinforcing. But the effect was the same. You began to internalize the idea that your sexual energy was either something to be hidden or something to be sold. The system didn't want you to see your sexuality as sacred, because sacred sexuality is power, real power, not dominance, not control, but spiritual force. And a person who learns to work with that force cannot be easily manipulated. They begin to awaken. They begin to ask questions. They begin to remember who they are. In ancient cultures, sexuality was once woven into the very fabric of spiritual life. In Tantra, sex was not just an act but a practice, a ceremony, a prayer, a merging of the masculine and feminine energies within and between us. Taoist sexual alchemy saw the sexual act as a way to cultivate qi, life force, for longevity, creativity, and enlightenment. Egyptian and Hermetic traditions spoke of energy exchange, transmutation, and divine union. But that wisdom has been buried, demonized, mocked, reduced to footnotes or fetishized fragments, while the masses are fed a narrative that sexuality is either something shameful or superficial. Because when sex becomes shallow, you become easier to control. When it's severed from spirit, it becomes a distraction, not a path. You're left chasing stimulation while being starved of connection. The result? A society addicted to sex yet terrified of intimacy, flooded with imagery yet starving for truth. And beneath it all, you sense it. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Some truths can't be shared openly on platforms like YouTube. That's why we created Insights Academy, our free newsletter where we go even deeper. Sign up through the link in the description, and you'll also receive a free copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. Because the real danger isn't sex itself, it's forgetting what it's for. Sexual energy, when denied or distorted, becomes a weapon against you. It's used to sell you products, to keep you distracted, to keep you longing. But when you reclaim that energy consciously, it becomes a current of liberation. It reconnects you to your soul. It reveals truths that cannot be explained in words, only felt, only lived. And so, you begin to question, if the version of sex you were taught was incomplete, what else have you missed? What happens when you stop seeing sex as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as a portal to be entered? What might awaken in you, not just physically, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually, when you finally allow the full truth of your being to emerge? The programming runs deep, but the truth is deeper, and you are not here by accident. You've felt the emptiness in the mainstream story. Now, you're beginning to feel the pull of something else, something ancient, something sacred, something waiting to be remembered. They told you sex was a physical act, a mechanical process, driven by hormones, instinct, or biological programming. Maybe they said it was about love. Maybe they said it was about pleasure. But what they never told you, what they were never allowed to tell you, is that sex is energy, raw, intelligent, transformative energy, the kind that can crack open your consciousness and shift the very trajectory of your spiritual evolution if you learn how to work with it. You feel it, even if you haven't always had the words for it. That surge before climax, the electric current running between bodies, the way touch can make your skin remember things your mind forgot. This isn't just emotion, it isn't just biology, it's frequency, it's life force, it's chi, prana, kundalini, different names across cultures, all pointing to the same hidden truth. Sexual energy is the most potent spiritual force we carry, because it's the same energy that created you in the first place. But instead of being taught to understand and cultivate it, you were taught to discharge it, waste it, repress it, or chase it mindlessly. You were told to numb it, suppress it, or pour it into empty experiences, disconnected from meaning or reverence. You were never shown how to circulate it through your body, how to use it for healing, how to allow it to rise into the heart, the throat, the crown, awakening parts of your subtle body that most people never access in a lifetime. Because if you did, you wouldn't just feel pleasure, you'd feel power, clarity, awakening. And that's not good for a world that profits from your numbness. The human body is more than flesh. It is an energetic system, an instrument made of frequencies and flows. You are not just skin and muscle. You are a field of energy in constant motion, and sexual energy, when activated with presence and intention, moves through this system like a sacred fire. It clears blocks, it amplifies intuition, it softens the hardened parts of you that the world has tried to turn to stone. This is why in many ancient spiritual systems, sex was not casual, it was ceremonial. Because they knew what you're only just beginning to rediscover, that when two beings meet with conscious presence, the act of union becomes a ritual of transformation. In those moments, energy flows beyond the physical. Breath becomes a bridge, eye contact becomes a conduit, sound becomes vibration, unlocking parts of the self stored deep in the nervous system. You are not just touching a body, you are touching a soul, a history, a pattern, a story, and they are touching yours. But when this is done unconsciously, it can leave behind confusion, fragmentation, and energetic residue. You feel drained, foggy, or anxious, without knowing why. You carry echoes of people you barely knew, because sex is not just touch, it's transfer, it's exchange. And once that exchange happens, it doesn't vanish with the goodbye. What most people call chemistry is actually energy resonance. It's the alignment, or misalignment, of frequencies. It's why some people feel instantly familiar, intoxicating, magnetic. And it's also why that same energy can become chaotic if not approached with awareness. You are not just reacting to a person. You are responding to a vibrational pattern that your body recognizes long before your mind does. And when this energy is misused, you don't just pay for it emotionally, you pay for it energetically. But when it's honored, when sexual energy is seen for what it truly is, it becomes the foundation for deep transformation. It becomes the fuel for spiritual growth, not its distraction. When channeled through the subtle body, it can awaken dormant parts of your consciousness. It can elevate your state of being. It can bring you into presence so profound, time seems to collapse. These are not myths. They are experiences available to anyone who chooses to reclaim what's been forgotten. Because once you understand that sex is energy, everything changes. The goal is no longer release. It becomes connection, awareness, expansion. You begin to feel your energy rising, your body softening, your perception sharpening. You are not escaping reality. You are entering a more complete one. And suddenly, sex is no longer an act. It's a practice, a meditation, a mirror, a remembering. And in that remembering, you don't just find pleasure, you find yourself. Sex doesn't end when the bodies part. It lingers, in your mind, in your memory, but more deeply, in your energy. You felt it. That strange heaviness after an encounter that felt off. That emotional fog that creeps in days later. The phantom pull of someone you no longer speak to, yet still feel. This isn't just sentiment, it's imprint. Because sex is not just physical, it's energetic. And energy doesn't forget. Every time you share yourself intimately, you are not just exchanging fluids or feelings. You are exchanging frequency. You are merging fields, opening channels, trading access to your most sensitive spiritual systems. And whether or not you're aware of it, your body, your energetic body, keeps the score. These imprints can uplift and nourish you, or they can cloud and confuse you. And yet, no one teaches you this. They say sex is just a personal choice, just chemistry, just a moment. But no moment that involves energy exchange is ever truly just a moment. It echoes. In ancient teachings, sexual union was understood as a karmic act, not in a moralistic sense, but in an energetic one. Karma is not punishment. It's memory, it's motion, it's resonance. And sex is one of the fastest ways to generate it. Because in those moments of openness, when the aura softens, the boundaries blur, and the heart is exposed, you become deeply receptive. If the energy exchanged is clear, present, and aligned, it nourishes you. But if it's burdened by shame, repression, manipulation, or unresolved trauma, it transmits more than just touch. It transmits pain, it transmits confusion, and those transmissions don't fade the moment the lights go out. You may find yourself drawn to people you logically know aren't good for you. You may replay moments, feelings, or sensations without wanting to. You may feel stuck in cycles that don't make sense, because part of your energy is still entangled in a past connection. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. Energetic cords don't need your consent. They form automatically when your field is open, and sex opens you faster than almost anything else. But here's the truth they never told you. You can clear those cords. You can heal the imprints. You can reclaim the parts of yourself that were left behind in past entanglements. But it begins with understanding what you're actually doing when you merge with another person. You're not just sleeping with their body. You're meeting their history, their wounds, their desires, their karma. You are inviting in not just who they are, but what they carry. And they're doing the same with you. This is why sex isn't casual. Not because it's wrong, but because it's sacred. And sacred things are never shallow. Sacred things leave echoes. They ripple, they imprint. And once you understand that, your choices begin to shift. You move from reaction to intention, from impulse to awareness. You begin to choose with clarity, with care, with consciousness. It's not about abstinence or guilt. It's about sovereignty, ownership of your field, stewardship of your energy. Because you are not just a physical being, you are a vibrational one. And every connection is a collaboration of frequencies. When you understand this, you stop seeing sex as conquest or entertainment and start seeing it as co-creation. You ask, what are we building with this energy? What are we invoking, exchanging, dissolving, or birthing through this act? Some connections are here to teach, to mirror, to reflect your own blind spots. Others arrive to help you heal. Some feel karmic because they are, and they're here to burn old patterns clean, but none of them are meaningless. Every union, whether one night or lifelong, is a thread in the web of your becoming. And the more aware you become of what each thread carries, the more freedom you gain to shape your own tapestry. When you bring consciousness to your sexual choices, you stop leaking energy. You stop carrying what isn't yours. You stop confusing chemistry for compatibility or pleasure for truth. You begin to see sex not just as a source of joy, but as a reflection of your inner state, a measure of how whole or fragmented you are. And through this awareness, something remarkable happens. You begin to heal, not through avoidance, but through presence. Through reclaiming your energy from every place it was unconsciously given away. Because sex is never just sex. It is a mirror, a portal, a ritual, and a karmic imprint. The question isn't whether it will affect you. The question is whether you're ready to let it affect you consciously, rather than unconsciously. Whether you'll allow it to be a teacher, not just a temptation. And whether you'll use it to lose yourself, or to find the parts of you you never knew were waiting. Before there was language, before there were beliefs or borders, there was polarity. Two forces, dancing through all of nature. The magnetic pull of opposites, masculine and feminine, light and dark, stillness and flow. Every tradition that studied the spiritual nature of reality understood this principle. It wasn't about man and woman, but about energy, two currents that, when united consciously, mirrored the creative rhythm of the cosmos itself. Sexual union is not just about bodies coming together, it's about those ancient forces merging. When it's conscious, it becomes a reenactment of the original act of creation, the divine split seeking wholeness again. But we've forgotten. In the noise of modern culture, in the obsession with identity politics, pornified imagery, and detached desire, we've collapsed this universal dance into a rigid, often hostile misunderstanding of masculine and feminine. We've reduced it to gender roles, to power struggles, to stereotypes. We've made the masculine aggressive, disconnected, emotionally numb. We've made the feminine submissive, chaotic, or over-sexualized. And in doing so, we've distorted the very energies that live within each of us. You carry both. Every one of us does. The masculine within you holds the archetype of presence, stillness, direction, focus, discipline. The feminine within you is the current of emotion, intuition, creativity, sensuality, and flow. These aren't just abstract traits, they are energetic realities. And when they're in harmony within you, your relationships reflect that harmony. But when they're in conflict, you attract chaos, confusion, repetition of painful patterns. This is why the people you're drawn to, sexually, emotionally, even spiritually, often reflect the imbalances you carry within. The masculine outside of you will expose your relationship with your own inner masculine. The feminine you desire or fear mirrors how deeply you've accepted or rejected your own feminine essence. This is the mirror. Sexual attraction isn't random. It's vibrational. It's magnetic. It's a reflection of the inner dance, seeking balance or resolution. And when that dance is met with awareness, something extraordinary happens. Union becomes not just a form of connection, but of alchemy. The body becomes a vessel, the heart becomes an altar, and sex becomes a living prayer, not to another person, but to the balance of life itself. In Tantra, this is the sacred marriage, the inner Shiva and Shakti coming into resonance. It's not a fantasy, it's not a performance, it's a return to wholeness. When a masculine essence meets a feminine essence in mutual reverence, safety, and presence, energy begins to circulate differently. It rises instead of leaks. It nourishes instead of depletes. The act becomes sacred, not because it's rare, but because it's real. And yet, most people never experience this, not because they don't want to, but because they were never shown how. No one taught them to listen to energy, to feel polarity, to differentiate between chemistry born of trauma and chemistry born of truth, so they confuse excitement for alignment. They chase intensity and call it connection. And in the process, they miss the deeper invitation, the invitation to heal, to harmonize, and to meet another from a place of integrated power, not fragmented craving. This is the potential of sexual union when it is seen for what it truly is. The moment where the universal polarities of creation converge within two human forms. The moment when the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, not in ideology, but in experience. The body knows what the mind forgets. The energy knows the path home. But for that to happen, you have to stop performing and start feeling. You have to let go of what you think you're supposed to be and tune in to what you truly are. You have to honor the masculine within you enough to stand in presence, and honor the feminine within you enough to surrender into truth. When both are held, seen, and expressed in balance, you don't just meet another, you meet yourself, fully, honestly. And when two people arrive in that space together, sex becomes something else entirely. Not a need, not a game, not an escape, but a ritual, a reunion. Because the masculine and feminine were never meant to fight. They were meant to dance, to pull each other into deeper becoming, to remind each other of the cosmic truth we've all forgotten, that within every union lies the possibility of divine remembrance. The question is, can you see past the surface long enough to feel it? There are moments, during deep intimacy, when the body softens, the breath slows, and the ego falls silent, where something indescribable happens. You forget where you end, and the other begins. Time dissolves, thoughts disappear, and all that remains is presence, pure awareness. In those moments, if you've ever felt them, you weren't just experiencing pleasure. You were touching the edge of the eternal. You were catching a glimpse of something ancient and infinite, something your soul recognizes but your mind was never trained to name. This is not fantasy. It's not idealism. It's the unseen dimension of union, the sacred current running beneath the surface of sex that no one taught you to look for. Sex has always had the potential to offer more than stimulation. It can offer transcendence, but only when it's stripped of performance, of expectation, of unconscious patterns, because what stands in the way of that deeper experience isn't your body, it's your mind. It's the stories you carry, the conditioning, the need to please or to prove, to dominate or to disappear, the ache to be wanted, the fear of rejection, the ghosts of lovers past. All of that sits between you and the divine experience that sex, at its highest frequency, can become. But when those layers begin to fall away, something else reveals itself. You begin to feel energy moving not just between bodies, but through space. You begin to sense the presence of something larger than the two of you. Call it spirit, source, God, the field. In the ancient texts, it's described as the third energy, the energy that emerges not from one or the other, but from the conscious merging of both. It's the energy of creation itself. And when you allow yourself to drop fully into it, you realize you're not losing yourself. You're finding the self beyond the mask. That's why some people describe moments of deep intimacy as spiritual. Because they are, not in the religious sense, but in the energetic, experiential sense. The veil thins, the illusion of separation begins to crack, and for a moment, however brief, you feel what mystics have spent lifetimes chasing: unity, oneness, the direct experience that there is no you and me, only us, only this, only now. This is what's possible when sex becomes conscious, when it's no longer about chasing climax but entering communion, when presence takes the place of performance and intention replaces impulse. And in that space, you don't just feel good, you feel whole, you feel free, you feel home. But here's what's often misunderstood. The physical act isn't the cause of that feeling. It's the catalyst, the gateway. The real transformation is happening in the energy, in the surrender, in the nervous system softening enough to let love in the willingness to be fully seen, and to see another beyond form. The body is the doorway, but the destination is soul. And yet, most people never go that far. Not because they can't, but because they've been taught to seek less, to stay on the surface, to reduce sex to a release, to treat it as a transaction, to keep it wrapped in roles and expectations. But the soul doesn't respond to roles. It doesn't awaken. in a performance. It awakens in presence, in vulnerability, in truth. Real union asks you to drop the masks, to let the heart lead, to feel every sensation, every emotion, every wave of energy, not as something to control, but as something to ride. And in that surrender, you begin to dissolve. The identity you cling to, the need to be this or that, starts to melt, and what's left is just being, just breath, just awareness moving through form. Two people remembering, together, what it feels like to exist beyond time. This is the forgotten potential of sexual intimacy, not as a physical reward, but as a spiritual doorway, not just to each other, but to the infinite. And once you've touched it, once you've felt that current flowing through your being, you can never quite return to seeing sex the way the world told you to. Because you'll know that hidden within the most primal act is the most sacred truth. That union, at its deepest level, reveals the illusion of separation. That behind the eyes of another is a reflection of yourself. And through them, in that moment, you meet the divine. Once upon a time, sex was not separated from spirit. It was revered as part of it. Entire systems of knowledge were built around this truth, not as myth, not as metaphor, but as practical, lived reality. In ancient temples, across continents and cultures, sacred sexuality was taught and practiced as a form of divine communion. It was understood that to access the highest levels of consciousness, one had to begin with the body, not reject it. One had to understand energy, polarity, breath, intention, and presence. And they knew that when these forces were combined with reverence, sex became a spiritual tool, a ritual, a transmission of wisdom, too subtle for words. But that knowledge didn't disappear by accident. It was buried, deliberately. Across history, institutions rose that saw consciousness not as something to expand but to control. The moment sex became sacred, it became powerful. And power, in the wrong hands, is always a threat. So instead of elevating that power, they demonized it. They rewrote the story. They turned sacred rites into sins. They twisted ancient teachings into taboos. Entire cultures were colonized, and with them, their spiritual technologies. What was once temple practice became perversion. What was once healing became heresy. And what was once a path to liberation became a weapon of shame. Look closer, and you'll see the evidence scattered through time. Tantric texts hidden or distorted. Gnostic gospels burned. The feminine body vilified. The priestess erased. The serpent, once a symbol of Kundalini, the coiled energy at the base of the spine, turned into a symbol of evil. The same serpent that winds up the spine during awakening was rebranded as temptation. A brilliant inversion. Make people fear the very energy that could set them free. The teachings that once guided people to awaken through their own inner union were replaced with doctrine. Worship was moved from the inner temple to external idols, from embodiment to obedience, from direct experience to blind faith. And as a result, humanity forgot. Not because we're broken, but because we were led away from the truth with surgical precision. We inherited the confusion of those who came before us, and most never question it. Most accept the distortion and live within it. Numb, disconnected, and convinced that sex is either a guilty pleasure or a meaningless routine. But the teachings were never fully lost. They survived in fragments, in whispered lineages, in sacred texts, in symbols misunderstood by the mainstream. The Hermetic principles, for example, still hold clues. The Kybalion speaks of polarity, rhythm, vibration, mentalism, all of which apply to sexual alchemy. These are not abstract ideas. They are blueprints. They explain how energy moves, how balance is restored, how thought creates form. And when you read them through the lens of sacred sexuality, everything changes. You begin to see how ancient wisdom was encoded, hidden in plain sight for those ready to remember, because remembering is the key. You don't need new information. You need to strip away the noise and reconnect with what you already know, but forgot. Your body remembers. Your energy remembers. It's why, Even after all the programming, there's still a part of you that longs for something deeper. That ache isn't just about intimacy, it's about integration. It's your soul trying to speak through the static, trying to show you that sexuality isn't a detour on your spiritual path. It's a central part of it. And yes, there will be resistance. Centuries of shame don't dissolve overnight. You may feel guilt, you may feel fear. That's normal. But those feelings aren't signs to stop. They're signs you're touching the edge of the lie. You're leaning into the membrane of the programming, and on the other side is truth. And once you cross it, once you feel what sacred sexual energy really is, what it does, how it heals, how it awakens, you'll understand why they tried so hard to keep it hidden. Because a society connected to its sexual power is a society that cannot be controlled. A person in tune with their energy is harder to manipulate. Someone who understands the sacred nature of their body does not fall easily for systems that trade freedom for convenience. And that's the real danger. Because when you awaken this within yourself, you become sovereign. You remember that your pleasure is not a sin, your body is not a battleground, and your energy is not for sale. It was never about denying sex. It was about denying you access to what sex can become when it's conscious. But now you know, now you see, and now you can choose to walk a different path. One not paved by guilt, fear, or conditioning, but by remembrance, intention, and truth. We live in a world obsessed with sex, yet starving for true intimacy. Everywhere you look, it's used to sell something: clothes, cars, food, fantasy. It's loud, it's polished, it's relentless. But for all the noise, for all the images and messages flooding our minds daily, very few ever ask the real question: why doesn't it satisfy us? Why, in a culture where sex is everywhere, do so many people still feel empty? The answer is simple, but confronting. Because obsession is not the same as devotion. And we've been taught to crave what we should have been taught to revere. The world taught you to chase sex like a product, something to consume, something to collect. It became a performance, a goal, a status symbol. You were conditioned to think that pleasure comes from friction, from release, from conquest or validation. But that's not pleasure. That's stimulation. And stimulation without meaning becomes hollow fast. It burns bright and fades quickly, leaving behind a deeper hunger that no amount of bodies, fantasies, or dopamine can ever fill. Because what you're actually seeking isn't more. It's depth. It's wholeness. It's home. Reclaiming sex as a spiritual practice doesn't mean making it serious or austere. It means making it real again. Devotion doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. It means offering your attention, your truth, your heart. It means approaching the act not as something to prove or perform, but as something to enter with reverence, even if it's just with yourself. In fact, that's where the reclamation begins, not in partnership, but in solitude. You begin by relearning your own body, not from the lens of fantasy, but from the lens of awareness. You stop rushing, you listen, you explore without expectation, you breathe with your sensations instead of escaping from them. This is self-pleasure as a spiritual practice, not indulgence, but integration. A way of coming home to yourself after years of being told to split apart. When you bring presence to your own sexuality, you start to see clearly what you've accepted out of habit, out of fear, out of programming. You begin to feel where you've abandoned your body, where you've ignored your boundaries, where you've traded connection for approval. And instead of blaming others or shaming yourself, you meet it all with compassion, with curiosity, with devotion. From that space, everything changes. You stop seeking from a place of lack. You stop attracting partners who mirror your wounds instead of your worth. You start calling in experiences that reflect your new frequency, experiences that nourish, that elevate, that honor. Sex becomes less about release and more about remembrance, a way to reconnect with your soul, with your power, with your sacredness. And yes, devotion requires unlearning. It requires slowing down. It requires facing the discomfort that often comes when we stop numbing and start feeling. But through that discomfort is where the healing lives. Because when you stop treating sex like a performance, you start allowing it to become a ritual, a space where the body and soul meet without agenda. A space where you're not trying to be anything, you're simply allowing what is true to rise. Imagine entering intimacy the same way you would enter a sacred temple, with respect, with intention, with the understanding that what you do here has the power to shape your energy, your emotions, even your destiny. That's not superstition, that's sovereignty. And it's available to anyone willing to step out of the noise and into presence. Because at its core, sacred sexuality isn't about technique. It's not about how long you last or how skilled you are. It's about how open you are to truth, how willing you are to feel, not just pleasure, but emotion, how deeply you're able to witness another without needing them to be different, and how honestly you can offer yourself, not in pieces, but whole. This is what it means to move from obsession to devotion, to stop performing for the world and start connecting with the divine. And when you do, the obsession fades, not because desire dies, but because desire is finally met. Not with fantasy, but with presence. Not with ego, but with essence. And that changes everything. You were never supposed to feel this far from yourself, this fractured, this numb, this unsure of where your energy ends and someone else's begins. But when you live in a system that teaches you to trade presence for performance, to chase connection through chaos, and to ignore your intuition in favor of external validation, disconnection becomes normal. You stop trusting your body. You second-guess your boundaries. You confuse craving with compatibility. And somewhere in the noise, you forget what it means to feel whole. Most people don't even realize they're disconnected until something breaks. A relationship implodes. A pattern repeats. The pleasure fades. The spark dies. And they're left wondering why they keep ending up in the same place with different faces. But this isn't just about relationships. It's about energetic integrity. About whether your choices are coming from clarity or from wounds disguised as desire. Because the truth is, much of what we call love is actually longing. Longing to be seen. Longing to be held. Longing to come home to ourselves through another. But no one can take you where you're unwilling to go first. You can't pour from an empty field. And when you've been conditioned to ignore your own body, to suppress your truth, to disconnect from your power, it's no wonder intimacy becomes distorted. You start giving yourself away in fragments, hoping someone else will make you whole. But sacred sexuality begins with wholeness, not with seeking it in someone else, but with choosing it in yourself. This isn't about becoming perfect before you connect. It's about becoming honest, becoming aware. It's about pausing long enough to ask yourself, what energy am I operating from? What am I actually seeking in this moment? Is this alignment or is this repetition? That's where the return begins, not in changing what you do, but in changing the level of presence you bring to it. Start by reclaiming your energy, not by withdrawing from the world, but by choosing where your attention goes. Begin to notice what drains you, who unsettles your nervous system, which environments, conversations, and behaviors leave you feeling foggy, frantic, or small. Your body is always speaking. The question is, are you listening? Then, take back your time. Slow everything down. We rush into connection thinking we'll lose the moment, but sacred things aren't in a hurry. They unfold. They require space. They need breath. Give yourself that. Let desire build. Let energy rise. Let clarity speak. The more slowly you go, the more truth you'll find. Let your past lovers teach you, without haunting you. Every entanglement that ended badly, every moment you ignored your instincts, every time you silenced your needs, those weren't failures. They were mirrors. They showed you where you were still fragmented, still outsourcing worth, still performing instead of expressing. Now, you get to choose differently. When you begin to honor your energy as something sacred, everything changes. You stop tolerating confusion. You stop trying to fix people who aren't ready. You stop negotiating your truth just to be chosen. And instead, You choose yourself, again and again, not from ego, but from embodiment, from the deep knowing that when your field is clear, your relationships become clearer too. This is how the cycle ends, not with drama, but with awareness, not with blame, but with responsibility. When you stop leaking energy into dead patterns, into unresolved pain, into false connection, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract, but because you're finally aligned. You no longer chase, you draw in. And what you draw in reflects the self you've returned to. Healing isn't a destination. It's a remembrance of what you are, of what you carry, of what you deserve. It's not always easy. There will be moments when you want to retreat, when the old pattern feels safer than the unknown. But keep going. Every time you pause to breathe instead of react, every time you feel instead of flee, every time you honor yourself instead of betray yourself, you're rewiring your entire relationship with intimacy. You're becoming the space where love doesn't hurt, where desire isn't manipulative, and where sex becomes sacred by default. You've been disconnected from yourself. Not because you're broken, but because the world benefits from you being fragmented. But now you see it. Now you feel the pull to return. And that return begins with one small revolutionary act, choosing to listen to your own energy before anyone else's voice. What if everything you've been looking for, truth, connection, awakening, was always inside you, locked behind a door no one ever gave you permission to open? What if sex was never the distraction, but the key, a tool not just for pleasure but for power, not just for bonding, but for becoming? That's the real secret. Not the one you find in magazines or movies, but the one buried deep beneath layers of cultural shame, generational silence, and spiritual amnesia. Sex is the key. The question is, are you ready to turn it? Because to reclaim the sacred is to undo everything the world has taught you. It's to break with the idea that you have to choose between being spiritual and being sensual. It's to reject the belief that pleasure must come at the cost of purity, or that purity requires the absence of desire. This split has kept people trapped in inner conflict for centuries, torn between who they are and who they think they're supposed to be. But the truth is, your body is not the enemy of your spirit. It is the expression of it. The energy that runs through you, that awakens during intimacy, that moves like heat or pulse or tingling, is the same energy that flows through every living thing. It is your life force, your creative essence, your divine fingerprint. And when you learn to work with it, instead of fearing or misusing it, you begin to unlock parts of yourself that were never broken, just buried. You begin to remember, not with your mind, but with your body, with your breath, with your being. This is what it means to become sovereign in your sexuality, to stop waiting for permission, to stop outsourcing your worth, to stop repeating stories that were never yours to begin with. You get to redefine what sex means to you. You get to choose intention over impulse, depth over distraction, connection over chaos. You get to turn the key, not to escape life, but to enter it more fully, to become more whole, more honest, more alive. And in doing so, you don't just change your relationships, you change your reality. Because when your energy is aligned, when your heart and body speak the same language, when your intimacy is rooted in truth, you become magnetic. You begin attracting experiences that mirror your evolution, not your past wounds. You start to feel seen, not just touched, loved, not just wanted. And that shift ripples into every part of your life. This isn't fantasy. It's the future, if you choose it. A future where sex is sacred, where union is healing, and where the body is no longer a battleground but a bridge. A future where you no longer run from your desire, but meet it with reverence. Where you no longer hide from your power but learn how to hold it. That future begins with one decision: to stop forgetting and start remembering. And the path of remembrance doesn't start in the sky. It starts in you, in your breath, your awareness, your presence. That's where the sacred begins, always has. If you've made it this far, you already know what most never will. But if you're not signed up for Insights Academy, you're missing the deepest layers. Go now, grab your free copy of the Kybalion, and unlock what we can't say here, because this journey doesn't end with knowing. It begins with living, integrating, practicing. You don't need another rule book. You need your own authority. You don't need more shame. You need embodiment. And the truth is, nothing can take you there faster, deeper, or more honestly than conscious sex. It shows you who you are. It reveals what you hide. And if you let it, it will carry you straight to the center of your soul. Sex is the key. It always was. And now, it's yours to turn. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.